to the Shōgun podcast. We're the Lorehounds, your guides to the political intrigues of feudal Japan. I'm John.
I'm David.
And I'm Elysia, and this is our season wrap-up podcast for the 10-episode FX Limited series, Shōgun.
Today, we've got a special guest with us, Nate Ledbetter, PhD candidate in Japanese Studies at the East Asian Studies Department of Princeton University.
We'll start off with our thoughts on the season overall, and then we'll move through discussing some key themes of the show while answering listener feedback.
Even though the show is over, you can still send us your emails, or better yet, join us on our Discord where you can chat with us, with Nate, and with many other fans of the show. We have dedicated threads set up for each episode of Shōgun, as well as other channels for all the different shows and books and movies and projects that we're working on.
And there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Lastly, if you've enjoyed our coverage, we would invite you to support the podcast and the community. You can subscribe on Patreon, or better yet, Supercast, which is like Patreon, but it's kind of built better for podcasters. We'll talk about all of that stuff and more, our upcoming schedule, our affiliate podcast. We'll do all that at the end of the episode.
There are links for everything in the show notes of this podcast. So on to the season wrap-up. Let's start by welcoming Nate. Nate, you've been a regular contributor on our Discord. I feel like every time we speculate about something about Japanese history, you're like, okay, here's an essay on what you got right and wrong here.
Do you guys remember when smartphones first came out and we had like access to Google? I feel like Nate is the Google of that early smartphone era. It's like, I don't need to go read the history. I'll just ask Nate and he'll have the answer.
Yeah, we all have a friend that we just ask about particular topics. And for Shōgun, this friend has definitely been Nate. So thank you so much. I've learned a lot from you as well from the show. And also you were in that Netflix docuseries.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Was it sorry, remind me, the Age of Samurai.
Age of Samurai. Yes. Yeah. And just, hello to everyone. And also, thank you for having me. It's been, I'm glad that I've had a location where I can just kind of like dump information and it's been appreciated as opposed to, what my wife or others would do, which would be stop talking. So, though probably, there have been a few people who've been like, okay, stop writing. I don't know.
Well, they can get out of here.
That's not Lorehound behavior.
Yeah, no, Lorehound behavior encourages the writing and the sharing of information. So
cool.
Yeah.
So thanks for being here, Nate. I think we will link in the show notes anything that you want, anywhere people can find you. If they want to read your writing and things like that, I think people would really appreciate that.
That sounds great. Yeah.
So why don't we get into the show itself? We did a full breakdown of every episode of this season. And when I say we, I mean we, because Elysia jumped in when my mom was sick and I was out for a bit, and David when you had COVID. And so thank you, Elysia, for subbing in for like half the season now.
We were just being Toranaga, studying the winds.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
Honto.
think I feel like Elysia is the third host of this podcast. This for Shōgun. So
I've had a really
you were
good
not a
time
sub.
doing it.
You were. What's that?
Right. I've had a really good time doing it. It was a show I didn't know I was going to get as into it as I was. Like, I think the first clue that I was going to really quite like it is even my mom was like, "Oh my God, Shōgun, that book."
That book.
Yeah.
You know what's fascinating, though, is that I did finish the book. And for me, it was like a 3 out of 5. It was not amazing.
Really? Okay.
The first half, 5 out of 5. The second half really drags it down. The pacing is all over the place. It's kind of dissatisfying the way certain things resolve. And they don't get as deep into the character drama. And I think the biggest weakness is it fails to really highlight Mariko as a character. And the show really, really brings her to life in a way that I don't think that the book succeeded in doing.
Right.
Yeah, the book is, I have a very complicated relationship with the book. I should, I guess, start off by saying, because quite honestly, the 1980 miniseries was my first exposure to it at age 4.5 or 5, something like that. And
you were doomed from there. I mean,
it was
your
the
whole
coolest
career
thing.
was set.
Yep, it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. I immediately dropped my fascination with cowboys and Native Americans, and immediately pivoted to the samurai are amazing. And my parents assumed it would be a phase, and well,
clearly not.
I'm now 47, and it's still a phase. So,
and it was a phenomenon when it came out. As a miniseries, it was huge.
Absolutely. But then, for a long time, I would read the book almost yearly for 20 years.
Wow.
But then the more, I went and I studied Japanese in college, and I lived over in Japan as an exchange student for a while. And then afterwards, when I went into the military and, was stationed in Japan and was doing kind of side study on my own of the history. And the more I got into it, the further and further away I got from the book, because I just couldn't make it past some of the problems with it.
Yeah.
And, we can get into that later if people want. But
I guess it was written in the 70s still.
It was written in the 70s. Clavel himself did not speak Japanese. So if you'll notice, for those who have read the book, you'll see many of the names have been changed or adjusted. And part of that is because Clavel had no idea how Japanese names worked.
Right.
So he just slapped a few on there. And it was really interesting. I was listening to a roundtable of historians talk about the everything from the book to the 2024 series, and kind of how to deal with it as both historians and educators, and what they liked and what they didn't. And Franz Krenz, the historian who works in Japan and was their hired historian to be their advisor for the show, was actually there as a participant. He was in the audience, and during the kind of question and answer session piped in with a few comments. And one of the things he said was, that was one of the things that they went to the production team with, to say, hey, this doesn't work. These names don't make any sense in the language. And
I'm glad he did. Yeah.
Yes. But the problem is, I guess what he said was, he and another person suggested, several name changes, but they all had to be run by James Clavel's daughter, who was kind of the
executor of the estate.
Yeah. Right. The custodian of it and all that. And so the impression I got, and I don't want to be putting words in his mouth, but the impression I got from his answer was that some of them were changed, some of them were not. Of course, certain major characters, you can see why they wouldn't change it, because you want to keep that connection to what people remember and are nostalgic. Others, that was one of the key tip-offs to me, that, okay, they've actually done some work here by changing this.
That's a little shocking to me, given that Clavel is noted to have done a lot of primary research before he even started. I heard part of the official podcast. They spoke with his daughter, and she said, he read for a couple of years even before he wrote the first word. So, I get playing fast and loose with the historical figures and some of the things that you might, intricacies of the culture that you might know, but something basic like names seems like a really bad omission.
I think we also have to keep in mind I can't remember which one of you brought this up earlier already, that this is before the age of Google, that it was harder to research details like this.
Yeah, that's true. So he's blowing off dust off books, and he's having a hard time there. Yeah. I think that Clavel and his daughter, it's interesting you bring up his daughter. She was, I think, a producer or executive producer on the show, and she had spoken very highly of the show when she came on the official podcast. And one of the things she said that I really liked was, she said, my father was he was into the history, but the main thing was entertaining. And so this show, what it brings to this franchise, this whole story, is the accuracy, is this level up of realism.
Yeah, and I think that's important, not only for the audience, but just speaking as a historian and a teacher who works with this material. That was important to me to see, that they're taking those extra steps to make it more, in some ways usable for someone like me who is going through the show in his classes. And, I've got students watching and commenting about it for credit and so forth. So it was very gratifying to see that. I'm just to go back a little bit to the language thing, one of the things that really started to move me away from the book, I guess I should say, is that the Japanese language dialogue that Clavel wrote is, I think he did a wonderful job given the tools that he had. Like you said, Elysia, he didn't have Google. But I think he did a wonderful job with the tools and with what was written at that time, right? We have the advantage of 40 plus years of additional English language scholarship that didn't exist at the time that he was researching.
Interesting.
And there's a lot that has come out and changed the way we think about things.
There's a lot more cultural interaction between Japan and the United States now, given the 80s business history and things like that.
Absolutely.
He didn't even have manga at the time.
That's right. There was no. What was this? Well,
he had
Battleship Yamamoto.
There were like the wood
Star
prints and
my students wouldn't understand a world like that without manga. But anyway,
Tetsuo.
But the language that like the Japanese dialogue that he writes into, and he I'm originally from the South, so bless his heart is what comes to mind.
I know what that means.
Yes. But I guarantee this is what he did, is he went to the dictionary and he looked things up and he kind of had a rough idea of the grammar and threw it all together, but it's not quite right if that makes any sense. And so a lot of it is dictionary words just plugged into the dialogue without the correct context, or one of the ones that stands out is the word dozo, which is, if you look it up in the dictionary, it means please, but it's like, please have a seat, or, oh yeah, please come in, or something like that. It's not a requesting please in the sense of, please do this for me, or, please give me a cup of coffee or something like that.
It's like a politeness, social lubricant thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. It
has a zone of use that doesn't exist in the same way.
But in a dictionary, you just get the word please. And I'm sure in 1970, like you couldn't Google, like you couldn't Google Translate or anything.
Sorry.
So,
are you guys familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect? So the Dunning-Kruger effect is basically describes how we all learn when we get a new interest, and we go nowadays we go down our Wikipedia rabbit hole, or whatever Clavel's
we had the Encyclopedia Britannica before.
Yeah, exactly. So and this is a terminology, I'm not making this up, this is what's used, it's not meant to insult him, but basically, so we're like, I don't know anything. And then you climb to the top of Mount Stupid, which is where you're like, oh, now I've learned some things. I understand it all. I am an expert on this thing. I know everything. And then you learn a little bit more and you sink into the Valley of Despair. And that's where you're like, I know nothing, Jon Snow. Like, I was arrogant and I'm a fool. And there's actually like
you repent
2,000 tenses of Japanese or whatever. And then from there, you finally take up this slope of enlightenment where you
This has described my entire journey of both learning the Japanese language and the history. I thought I knew a lot before I got to graduate school and was shown just how little I knew. But and still how little I know. But anyway, yeah.
Nate, I think there was some questioning in the Discord. There were some folks were curious about how you ended up in the military in Japan a little bit. So
okay,
just a light brush around that.
I mean, my brother ended up in the military in Japan accidentally. So
most people, it is accidental. So for me, like I said, I Shōgun kind of ignited that interest in Japan. I was the weird kid in elementary school show and tell presentations who was, bringing in random Japanese things and talking about that, or doing all my report. I think in like 5th grade, I wrote a report on samurai armor classification types. And I don't understand why my parents didn't disown me at certain times, but we all have our quirks anyway. But so when I was going, trying to decide where I wanted to go to undergrad and so forth, part of the things that I wanted was I wanted to go somewhere where I could go spend a year in Japan as an exchange student. And I was looking, my family background is heavily military, multiple branches. My dad was Navy, grandfather was Navy, uncles in all of the other services except the Marines. So for me, it was like, okay, well, how am I going to pay for college? ROTC scholarship. So that's what I did. I was able to spend my sophomore year of college in Japan as an exchange student, which was wonderful. Clearly, the poster on the screen as we're talking is all the way from then. And then, finished up, graduated, went into the Army as an officer. Did some other things for a while. Actually, my first duty assignment out of training was in Korea. And I chose that because it was the closest place I could be to Japan and still be on tanks, which is what I was doing at the time.
You were a tanker?
Yeah. I was I was a tank platoon leader for a year in Korea.
Wow.
Came back,
That's a short lifespan for a theater war in Korea on a tank.
It probably would have been.
Yes.
I have a question about Korea too. To follow up with this, to tag on to what you're about to say, is how much you feel like you learned about Japan from being there, given their interwoven history.
So at the time, so I was stationed in Korea twice, actually. There for a year, and then I went back a couple years later as a unit intel officer, both to the same camp. Oddly enough, what I learned was that there's a very complicated relationship because I had some good Korean friends that I made because they didn't speak English, I didn't speak Korean, but we both spoke Japanese. I had an interesting interaction that sticks with me where I was out with some friends in town. We were out grabbing a beer or whatever, and I was waiting for my friend to come out of the bar, and there was this very old Korean woman, and she just kind of looks at me, and I look at her, and of course I don't expect her to speak English. But she says something to me, and I told her in Japanese because it's the language I can speak. Sorry, I don't speak Korean, but I speak Japanese. And she gets this look on her face and then starts immediately speaking to me in Japanese. And we had like a good, 5-10 minute conversation, which was really interesting. It was just, small talk and whatever, but it was the kind of thing where it was like, in the moment, this is very interesting. Why does this old lady speak Japanese? Well, it's because, until 1945, from, 1910 to 1945, it was under Japanese colonial rule, and all the Koreans were forced to speak Japanese, so she learned it in school as a little girl during, that time period.
Shout out to the Apple TV show Pachinko.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. Yeah.
Great.
Reminder to watch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you watch that?
I have not. I have. It's on the list now that I have started interacting with the community and I'm starting to get these recommendations like this.
I think I could convince Elysia very easily to podcast with me about
Oh, absolutely.
Pachinko. So,
no, I loved it. And I can't promise
Nate.
to read the book.
Yeah, we'll get you.
That may be one. I'm actually teaching a course in modern Japanese history next school year. So I don't know, maybe that'll be worth a look so that I can integrate it into the syllabus for the students or something.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Sounds fun.
Anyway, sorry, kind of like I'm making a very long story out of all of this, which I tend to do. If you've seen my Discord posts, you know that. But I, so anyway, was stationed in Korea twice, whatever. And then after the second time I went to Korea, my duty assignment was Japan, because I was assigned to a small little office in Tokyo that did liaison work with
it's Edo tonight.
Japanese. Yes, it's Edo. Okay. So we were in Edo doing liaison work with Japanese government agencies. And it was, I got the assignment because I spoke Japanese and had that on my, official records that I did. They have a qualifying test to judge how well you are, so whether they can use you or not. And so I was sent there, and at the time, it was a small little office of 8 people. I was the only actually uniform military member. The rest of the office was 3 American civilians who worked for, the U.S. Army, and 4 Japanese civilians who worked for the U.S. Army. And the 3 Americans were all Japanese American heritage speakers of Japanese. So I very quickly, my Japanese improved quite a lot, because more often than not, our office discussions or meetings were all in Japanese. And then from there, that was my first year and change in Japan. And then as a Japanese speaker, I just kind of stayed there. I would transfer around to different jobs. But, funnily enough, when they have somebody who actually speaks the language, they like to keep them there and gainfully employed. So, I got to do quite a lot of different things, including my last assignment when I was in Japan was as a liaison to a Japanese regional command headquarters, where I was the only American in only American, service member. Working in a 4 or 5 hour radius.
Were you the blackthorn of your?
I was.
Do you have to talk like this?
So the funny thing is, I relate to blackthorn in some ways, but honestly, given my work experience and my time as a liaison, a lot of the work I was doing was being an interpreter. I relate to Mariko so much in that regard. So it's so funny to see all the commentary and even memes popping up about, Mariko's translations and how they gradually drift away from the
literal,
intended. Yeah, the literal. And I'm like, no, I get it. I so get it.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes you just want to get, the point across as basically as possible to make sure that it does.
Right.
So,
thank you, Nate, for all your background and everything. I want to talk more about the show before we run out of time here. So hot takes on the season. What did you think about the show overall?
You're asking me?
I'm asking you, Nate.
You're asking
Congratulations. Okay. John Blackthorne. Don't worry, I'm not Philomena Kunk. I know that you're an expert, so you're all potentially victimized by Philomena Kunk.
Oh,
but
that show is hilarious. But
it is hilarious. But don't worry, I'm asking you a real question.
Which show is that, John?
Kunk. Oh, what is it?
Kunk on Earth.
Kunk on Earth.
Okay.
Yeah.
You never saw it, Elysia?
No, never.
Oh, it's great. She has a fake history of the world.
Okay.
And she goes and interviews different experts and tries to make them just like agree with stupid things that she says.
Okay.
It's funny to see whether or not the quote unquote expert that she's interviewing gets the joke or not.
Yeah. There's like one guy who's always trying to make her stupid statements profound. He's like, well, that's actually a really interesting framing of the issue.
Yeah.
Anyway, enough about.
Sorry, I derailed the.
Enough
we
about
were getting on track.
I'm just trying to get us on track, Elysia. Come on. Nate, what'd you think of the season?
So, I'll be honest. I went in with kind of low expectations. Mostly because I didn't want to get hurt emotionally.
You have to guard your secret heart.
Yeah. But I was quite pleased. I thought they did a fantastic job. They corrected many of the things that the book and the show that were problematic. Let's say. I don't want to get into necessarily what's right or what's wrong because it's fiction.
Sure. You mean more like broad themes, right? Like everyone being obsessed with suicide. Everyone being
obsessed with suicide. The prevalence of kind of almost weird sexually discussion in especially. It's not just the fact that sex is present in the book, but that it's very much a, white man goes to, non-white country and everybody is impressed with his manhood kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I know. So like I was telling my wife this, I was like, every 50 pages, somebody has to comment on this man's penis. Like even yes. Toranaga at one point is just like, I hear the Anjin is well hung. It's just like, what?
Right. Well, and okay. So this actually takes me into, one of the specific things that I wanted to pinch is I was looking for all of that to be gone. I was like, please get rid of all that. Don't mention the word pillowing. Don't use the ridiculous metaphors that he uses to exoticize, talk about sex in Japan at this time and whatever. And so I was a little disappointed. I think it was episode 2, I think, as they're coming out of Osaka. Before they get ambushed, and they talk about, it was that, and it was like the doctor visit or whatever after he's in the jail cell, and pillowing comes up, and they talk about pillowing, and I was like, oh no, but they did cut most of it, and then as I watched through the season. Something that struck me was that every time they did use the word pillowing, Blackthorn himself is like looking at them like, this is the dumbest thing ever. Right? Yeah. Like he's, first of all, in the Japanese dialogue, the word for pillow is not in there whatsoever. So like it's almost in a very subtle way pointing out the ridiculousness, if you want to interpret this way, the scene where Fuji is introduced as his consort to him, and he's like, "I don't want to pillow her, pillow on her, pillow around her." It kind of points out that the whole use of this pillow as a metaphor is kind of silly. So I really appreciated that. After I let it kind of like sink in a little bit.
I have to ask John, every time you hear this pillowing used this way, do you think of Pillow Friends from the Wheel of Time?
I didn't until you just said that. I will say I do have an earworm. I have an earworm of you on one of our earlier podcasts. I think the first time you subbed in for David with me, where you went, "The honor of women." And I don't know why, but that became an earworm for me. So every time I think of Blackthorn yelling something, I think of you shouting "the honor of women."
He's always defending it.
It's improper.
So, Elysia, your general thoughts.
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to cut off Nate's thoughts.
No.
Oh. But I thought that it was overall a masterfully told tale, nearly perfect, just incredible cast and production values. I'm so glad that I got to experience it live because this is a type of cultural phenomenon where we're all watching the same show and we're all talking about it and we're all feeling things and discussing the nuance of character and history and all this doesn't happen that often anymore. So that was another thing that just added another layer on top of just their superb crafting of the story. And I think we're going to be talking about the show forever now. But I stand by my preference that I'd rather an anthology season of, a different point in Japanese history, which could even be with the same actors, but rather than a season 2, because I just think it ended exactly where it should, with such beautiful symmetry. And it's hard for me to imagine how they would continue this story without messing up that, beautiful kind of mirror image of a total season.
Yeah. That's a good point.
I would agree with that. I just think it would be anticlimactic at best. So, yeah.
So, David, what are your overall thoughts on the season? We're doing hot takes here. That's why I'm going quickly between people.
It's funny, we were recording our first episode for our season 1 recap for House of the Dragon, and we couldn't stop with the comparisons between the two. So I find it really interesting that these two are back to back with each other. And we love a good comparison in the Lorehounds, right? We love to mix our IP, stew with all the different fun, chunky bits. And I like that we're having this ability to compare, because one of the things that starting to watch House of the Dragon again makes me think about Shōgun is that this show was so elegant in its production and its storyline. They took such care to craft the cultural elements, the character elements, the sets and everything, that it was just so fun. It's a beautiful piece of artwork, and I just feel fortunate that we got to be part of it. And the fact that it then became a monocultural event in mini, because I don't think it probably did as big numbers as House of the Dragon will do, but there was a definite buzz around it. And we as podcasters love that, because that means audience, right? It means downloads, it means connecting with people. And not to be too cynical, it's just fun to be part of a group event when things are happening like that. So I found it was really profound, dealt with a lot of really deep, interesting topics like loyalty, like fate, like the whole question of, the your different hearts, and your motivations. And then the acting was phenomenal. I was really skeptical of Cosmo Jarvis going into this. I saw some of those early production stills that they released, and I was just like, oh no, this is going to be bad.
I didn't like him in the last thing I saw him in. So yeah, I was with you.
Right. But yet he sunk right into the role perfectly. And then to see Anna Sawai is a monster. She has got acting chops for days. Then to think that she came out as a J-pop star, know.
But you can also see the directing was so good, because she filmed Monarch after this, and she's fine in Monarch.
Seriously,
she's
I didn't realize
just
that.
Fine though, and this is next level where
exactly
she should be getting an Emmy soon. Fine,
yeah,
seriously.
What's interesting is she was not let out of her J-pop contract to play. It was one of those DC. It was in Suicide Squad. She was asked to be in Suicide Squad. Forgot the name of the character, and apparently her J-pop group was like, no, you can't do that.
Interesting. Yeah, got to protect the brand, got to protect the J-pop brand.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just really enjoyed this season. I think it's going to have legs, so it's a kind of thing you can come back to year after year and find new nuances. And as you learn, if you're of that interest, if you learning about more about Japanese history and culture. And I do agree that, something that has been brought up is that there is a Western fascination with Japanese culture, and that has been around, I think, for a long time. And when we compare Western European feudal history to Japanese feudal history, there's a lot of similarities in terms of feudal structure. So that's interesting. And the fact that we have knights and armor. So if you're at all into the medieval warfare kind of stuff as a kid, certainly got that bug at one point, to see the Japanese versions of these things. And so there's so much depth and history and richness that you could just keep watching this over and over again. and continue to discover new things about it. So I really appreciate that from an art standpoint. And I'm quite satisfied that there's going to be no season 2. I do not. I am into a single season of television. Station 11, The Queen's Gambit, certainly Shōgun's going to rank in there. Tell a story well, have a beginning, middle, and end, and do that thing, and that's it, done. Right? We don't always have. There are certain shows that we want to roll on forever. Slow Horses is kind of a great popcorn modern television show of that ilk. Even though it's not 22 episodes, it's more in the in the 10 range. That's fine. That thing can run forever, and it's fun, and it is what it is. A story like this, where it's profound and thoughtful and crafted, cool. See it one season, done. It's gonna have a lot of potency and power for me going forward, knowing that they're not trying to milk it for money. Yeah. Now, if the showrunners and the production team want to do something else, they have my attention. If FX says in a few years, hey, we're doing something else with the same writers and the showrunner and the production team, whatever, I'm there. You don't have to convince me, right? You've got me at the opening statement. So, yeah, a really, really an amazing show, and I'm also just really, I love our fandom. I love the Lorehounds community. I love the fact that the three of us were able to communicate. I love the fact that this show brought Nate to us as well, and so I think from that standpoint, it's also an enriching, because this is what we love as this community, is to nerd out on television together, and it did that for us in so many ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, this show, I went in really skeptically because you had suggested this to me, and I wrote in to get us screeners, and they said no, and I was like, well, now I don't want to cover it. But even without it, I was like, oh, this seems like it could be a really cheap historical piece. I don't know if I really want to do that. Yeah. I'm always nervous about an American production screwing it up. Although I don't know if this was a fully American production. I believe they filmed a lot of it in Japan too, and they had a lot of Japanese personnel involved. But anyway, I'm
Canada,
always nervous.
as people keep pointing out with the foliage.
Yeah. All right,
the rain
fine.
and the trees. Yeah,
fine. I will say, production wise, amazing. Comparing to House of the Dragon, they both have great wig work. The wig people are really on it.
You and Joanna Robinson.
Oh yeah,
she has a wig watch on.
Wig watch. Forgot about her with that. So the wigs are great, the makeup is great, the costuming is great.
Oh, the costuming is just divine.
Everyone's got
the hat game.
The hat game is great.
I still think of Saeki's costumes.
Oh, Saeki's helmet. That was awesome.
Yeah.
And that's like real, right? There's like a statue with that guy who's got that.
That was a very popular style. Which,
amazing.
Speaking as somebody with military experience and so forth, the idea of some of these helmets in combat seems I just ridiculous. I don't get it. I don't get it. But I get, like, if you saw the Taiko's armor in some of the scenes where Ishido is in the chamber stamping the documents, and he looks over at the Taiko's armor looming over him with the huge,
just like the one behind you,
just like the one behind me, because that's a poster of from a NHK, the Japanese National Broadcasting Company's production of a drama series based off the real historical Taiko's life. And the fact that they used like these real armor was a bit like, some of them were a bit odd. I won't go into too much detail, but Yabushige's armor was a little bothersome to me. Though the mullet helmet, how can you not love that? But the fact that they went in and they, like, the Taiko's armor is an actual set of armor, or based on an actual set of armor that the real historical person wore, was a nice touch. I thought. I thought that was great.
Maybe we'll get you and Matt Cavanaugh. I don't know if you heard that podcast with Matt Cavanaugh on Star Wars. He's a retired lieutenant colonel, I think. And he was he's a military historian, and he taught at West Point. And we had a great conversation with him, and we're planning to have him come back at some point. Maybe I'll have you and him on the pod or something like that. That would be fun to talk military history. Anyway,
round table. Can I give you a would you rather? Would you rather go into battle using Saeki's helmet or Damon's winged helmet?
Oh.
Damon does lose the wings when he's at an actual combat. I think maybe they just detach or something.
Yeah, because that gives something for people to grab onto too much.
Sure.
Well, I don't know. Yeah. Saeki's has a pretty big target to grab onto, too.
It's harder to grab. There's too much hat.
Saeki's, I just think of it as, because it's so tall, I'd be worried, if you're in an open field, you might tip over.
It's an arrow magnet.
But if you were in any kind of like a forest or anything like that, you're just banging on every tree that you have.
That's a good point.
So
you're losing that hat anyway. Yeah,
that's right.
All right, I think that's enough for hot takes. Why don't we take a quick break? When we get back, we will dive a little deeper and get into listener feedback. And we're back. So I want to get a little bit deeper into this show. And I think we could actually use the listener feedback to structure, because the listener feedback, as Nate, our listeners are often long-winded, and they like to give us their deep thoughts. So first up, we've got Jake P, an OG listener, as you've written here, David. If, by the way, if you can send emails to Shōgun@thelorehounds.com. We're not going to read them on air because this is the last podcast, but you can always send us an email if you just want to chat. So Jake writes, "Hey, Lorehounds, been listening since Rings of Power and first time commenting." Well, thanks for being here a long time, Jake. I want to make sure that you see that in the Shōgun finale, the final shot shows Toranaga standing on the lakeside with the mountains spread out on either side of him like falcon wings. If you look carefully, his hair even resembles the falcon's hood. Just thought it was an awesome moment and wanted to make sure you pointed out to listeners in your recap. Thanks for all the great content. Please give me a shout out so I can share with my wife, Jake. Hello, Mrs. Jake. Jake wrote into the podcast, we promise.
No, that's a really cool observation. I can still picture it in my head, but I didn't notice the hairstyle. Very well spotted.
That is fun.
I think it goes to the production again, the way that they used the camera to tell the story, the way that they were conscious of the backgrounds and of the environment, and how they used all of these pieces to create a rich visual storytelling. There was the scene when Mariko is trying to leave Osaka Castle. And we've got, the people up on the battlements watching, and then we've got her down below. And the way that they used the camera, they used this continual push in with these short push movements. And all through the setup of that whole scene, all the way back to even when she's not in the courtyard yet, when she's getting ready to leave. And that push movement connotes sort of energy. It gives you a sense of movement and the closeness and the intimacy of the situation that you're in. And so that like really adds to the tension, and you feel the increasing tension as they're starting to fight. Or in that scene when she reaches down to have the spear put into her hand. I'm sorry, what was it? It's the
Naginata.
Naginata, thank you. To take the Naginata, it's a perfectly framed shot. When she falls back exhausted at the end, she falls back into the cordon, a little sort of accidental cordon of arrows that were shot at her feet. And so it further gives us the feeling of being trapped, right? Even though it's an indirect thing, it's still, very present. Or after Ishido gives them their papers, Blackthorn and Mariko are standing there, and as the camera pulls back and we see the wide shot, it's a wedding, right? The visual shot implies that they're now spiritually wed together. They had this moment of union. They don't have to tell us that They don't have to say anything. They can show us that. And I think with this idea of what Jake is saying with the falcon wings, that was just maybe something that just happened in the moment. They were just like, oh, that's kind of cool. Maybe they weren't even really aware of it directly. And they were just trying to frame a shot nicely so that, there's not weird things in the background sprouting out of somebody's head. But that goes to the point that I made earlier, that the show is crafted, that they cared about every single element that went into the show.
Yeah, I even think of Cosmo Jarvis sort of stumbling towards the screen angrily in his Honor of Women scene. It feels like he's getting bigger. He's taking up more space in the scene, right? He's distracting the attention of the Ishido forces.
One of the things I found very interesting on rewatch was that scene, both of those scenes, the Mariko scene where she's attempting to leave and ends up fighting with Naginata, and the Blackthorn scene where he provides the distraction by pretending to go crazy and whatever. Those take place in the exact same spot. That kind of little bailey in between gatehouses. And of course, I didn't notice that on the first watch, but going back and rewatching it and seeing it, like, you become so much more familiar with the locations and you can see kind of that symmetry. And I thought that was very interesting. It's this, we keep going back to that spot to see these moments of pivotal action that involve leaving or being prevented to leave. Which I thought was very interesting.
All right, so let's move on to Dork of the Ninjas, Michael, who writes in. One time when we were still in Bald Move, Brandon and I hopped on Sea of Thieves, which is a video game, and Dork of the Ninjas came on, and I was like, "What do I call you, Dork?" And he's like, "Michael is fine." Anyway, so Michael wrote in both a message and a voicemail. Let's start with the message. Michael says, "Hey guys, just wanted to write in since I'm out of town for work about the latest episode of Shōgun. Wow, what an episode. This episode was Mariko's from the start, and she never let us think otherwise. From the way she walked out of the Regent room to her owning her death at the end. She never let anyone tell her that she wasn't in control. They even made me believe her and Blackthorn were properly together now, with him subbing in as her second. It showed his loyalty to her, and that he could be loyal even at all. I cannot wait for the last episode in the series recap. Keep up the great coverage." I guess either this was a late write-in or we missed it on the episode 9 coverage.
I think we did. Did we skip feedback on 9? I don't remember.
Yeah, we skipped feedback on 10 directly. Okay. So, yeah.
On 10, yeah. Anyway, I wanted to open this up because I skipped Nate's other 2 points on his general thoughts. So I wanted to open this up for Nate to go talk about the Mariko JB relationship.
Oh, well, okay, yeah. So one of the things that I really appreciated, even through the rewatch, thought it was good, was the way that they adjust, I guess I should say, because they don't eliminate it. Obviously, we see that Mariko and JB have a relationship, but they don't make it overt, and they don't dwell in it, I guess I should say. They cut a lot of what comes in as the book is like they have this long love affair, and it's very, it's obviously sexual, but it's also very romantic, and they're speaing to each other in Latin, and
it's like Romeo and Juliet, right?
Yeah, you get these lovey-dovey scenes,
yeah,
right? And they cut all that, which I appreciate, because I think that's where a lot of the sense of, white man goes to foreign land and wins over the ladies kind of sentiment is rooted in, is those scenes, right? But they don't cut it entirely. What we get is these, what I think is more realistic. There's a few nights of passion that happen in times where the emotions are particularly high. The first time we see them get together and we're not even quote unquote really sure that it's her because, they don't tell us directly and they don't show her face very clearly, but is right after they've had kind of what I've seen called the date scene in the hot spring, where he's describing taking her to, if we were in London, I'd take you out to a play and we'd go meet the Queen and walk along these places. And it's after they think her husband has died. So she's, as far as anyone knows at that point, a free woman. And so she kind of decides, well, yeah, why not? Let's do it. And she, goes into his room and
just a quick side note on the Buntaro thing. And we said this on the episode way back when, but I would totally watch a standalone episode or a little mini series of Buntaro fighting his way from the docks back to Ajiro. Like, I don't care how long it is, an hour, 2 hours, a mini series, multiple. I don't care. I want to see
it should be anime with, the cartoon blood splattering.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be so perfect. And Buntaro's face and like enraged, battle enragement. And yeah, totally. Anyway, sorry.
As he's, making his way through enemy lines and
slaughtering his way. Yeah. I think animation's a good call.
Yeah. But then, we have the relationship, getting back to the relationship between Mariko and Blackthorn. It's complicated. It's not this lovey-dovey story. They have conflict. There's scenes where it appears where Mariko actually hates him. She doesn't want to talk about what happened. She's not like in this for a relationship. She's disgusted by him at times. But then they come back together, in episode 9, as the result of an emotional experience where she's just gone through, literally being seconds from death. And he's made this grand gesture of offering to help her in that, despite that he doesn't want to do that at all, right? That he has this love for her, which is much more than just this sexual passion, right?
Yeah.
And
he showed he understood her. Yeah.
Right. Like he showed, like, not only that, I mean, he showed that, but he also shows it in the whole, it's kind of cheesy, the scene where he's like, if not for good sense, if not for, yourself, live for me. As if she was ever going to say, oh, okay, well, you've totally changed my mind now. But I think she shows by when she grabs his hand that she understands where, that for him, that's an expression of his feelings. And then for him to then come around, shortly after that and offer to be her second, giving her what she wants, even though it's the opposite of what he wants, I think is a very natural lead in to then what happens afterwards, where they have, they get together physically again. I think it's much better done that way than giving us this, love story. And then, spending time on, oh, well, what happens if we get caught or blah, blah, blah. Like, I just thought it was a way to include it, but not dwell in it.
Well, it makes it, for a lot of people, a lot of people love, especially the love stories where it's about the lingering glances and about the yearning rather than the consummation. And then, especially because, we can respect these characters more when we think they're doing their best to hold by whatever vows. I mean, I guess Blackthorn isn't. He does not seem to care about the family back home. But Mariko, at least, she, in this version of it, which I understand is a change, she didn't act on anything until she thought her husband was dead.
Right. And then once she realizes that he's alive, she no longer acts on it until that last night.
Right. And that felt earned.
And then, interestingly enough, the fact that they're together in the room is key to her survival. Well, not survival, but her not getting captured because Blackthorn's there to assist when the shinobi attack occurs.
Did you ever think this year, and I'll push back to you, Elysia, in a minute. Did you ever think this year that you'd be defending decapitation as an act of love?
I did not.
It was willingness to decapitate. Whatever you need, honey.
Yeah,
well, I think that marks Blackthorn's journey, though, and this is an interesting point that was, I believe, brought up on the official podcast. Maybe I can't remember where all the sources are, but this idea that Blackthorn has an evolution. His character evolves over time, where Yabushige stops, and he doesn't evolve, and he ends up dead, and Blackthorn ends up a caged bird, but still alive and living a version of his best life. But that these are these markers where he's come around and he actually understands what Mariko needs in that moment. Before he was like, come run away and escape. That's him. Whereas in that moment, he finally realizes, oh no, if I really do love her, then what is it that she needs in this moment? I need to be selfless, and I need to do this thing that will haunt me forever.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm willing to do it.
That's what he's giving up. Yeah,
exactly. And then at the end,
he has to live with it.
Yeah. When he's willing to commit seppuku and Toranaga stops him, again, that's another marker of his evolution, that he's willing to give his life to something greater than himself, which is to save the village, to save the villagers of Anjiro. And he's not using it he's starting to understand the language of Japan, the cultural language of Japan, not just the spoken word, but the forms and the methods. And I think that's really interesting when you think about what Hiramatsu did. He's like, I can't let all of these generals do this. I'm going to take it for the team. So Blackthorn is able to take that lesson as well and evolve. So, and they told that story in the relationship between Mariko and Blackthorn. Yeah. That's how we see this change, and I think that relationship is really central to how the story moves from beginning to end.
Yeah, Elysia, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to ask you guys, what do you think would have happened if Ishido had succeeded in kidnapping Mariko? Would that have caused Toranaga's plan to fail, or would that still be? I mean, it seems to me, if I think about it, the way that Mariko was arguing it would still show that she was unsafe in his castle. Would that?
How would you stop Mariko from? Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, go ahead. Just would you? How do you think it would have affected Toranaga's plan, or do you think it would have backfired on Ishido?
I think Mariko would have used every opportunity, found every opportunity to remove herself, to end her life. I think she would have taken every single opportunity. And at some point, that's the Crimson Sky grenade that would have gone off, because everybody loved Mariko, right? She is a paragon of society in Osaka. And so that would have rocked the foundation. So I think she would have just, whatever the method, she would have figured something out.
Yeah.
Her entire purpose is, and she says this in the episode, is to make obvious, or to, everybody knows it, but nobody's saying that Ishido is holding everybody there as hostage.
Mm-hmm.
And she's forcing them to say it out loud. Say the quiet part out loud.
It's the whole make them say the quiet part out loud thing. So I think at that point, even if she's captured, Toranaga has him in a catch-22, where if she dies, then everybody's upset that he killed her and, turns against him. If she lives, but nobody's left, nobody's allowed to leave, then it's very obvious that he is bungling everything and, forcing everybody to stay there and not letting people go freely. And so therefore they're going to turn against him. So I guess the idea is to let her surviving.
Yeah. I guess he just wanted to make her stop saying the quiet part out loud. Maybe maybe hiding her out of view, he thought would be better.
Like, I honestly, as I was watching it this morning for the second, for, I don't know, the fifth time, something like that. the thought occurred to me that he had already lost, but the ordering the shinobi attack was like the final screw up, right? Like he compounded everything and made it worse. To the point where I actually think when he says, we know it's not true because he contacted Yabashige and got Yabashige's help, but he suggests after the fact that, only Toranaga would be, wily enough to have, contacted ninjas and had them attack, almost setting it up like, Toranaga did it to make us look bad, right? Well, we know that's not the case, but it's almost plausible because it's such a dumb move. So, yeah. Like it's very obvious in the council scene afterwards that where Kiyama is even like, I can't believe somebody on the council might have even done that.
Right. I was trying to remember. It was Kiyama. This castle is not so safe.
Right.
Nor are there woods. There's so many bandits in the woods. Oh, Osaka. Oh,
right. Yeah. So to me, that highlights the fact that that Ishido has royally screwed this up.
Royally.
So no matter
or
what the effect was. Yeah. Right.
Well played.
All right. So we're running out of time here. So I want to make sure that we get to everybody. Michael also left a voicemail. So David, can you play that now?
Here we go.
Hey guys, just want to get my thoughts on the most final episode of Shōgun. I really do want to focus on Yabashige. Basically, how I've come to realize he's basically like a wild animal to a degree. Mm-hmm. You can see when in this episode, I think capitalizes that in two different ways. He would constantly always just go to whatever was the best source of power or food for what it would be for an animal, power for him, and also what would be the best situation there. And he got to the point where in this episode he became a cornered animal, and we saw him go as erratic as we've ever seen him go. Had the moments of just trying to just do every desperate measure to just save himself until the moment of he gets his seppuku ordered. He is trying his best to get himself out of it. But once he realizes there is nowhere for me to go, I am going to die, he surrenders himself at that point. And you can see he even kind of, I think, views himself as that and realizes that about himself is death poem, giving the thoughts of leave my body for the wild, if like basically for let a dog be fed by my body. That's like he views himself, I think, as that dog. Was constantly always looking for wherever he could find his next meal, always looking for where he could just skate by, not worried about allegiances, just worried about what was best for him at all times and damn the consequences of anybody else. I think he's a great character. He's one of my favorite characters I think I've ever seen in any show, period. But I don't think you can trust his allegiances as far as you could throw him. But I love this series, one of the best series of the last 5 or 10 years in my opinion. I just hope that this creative team comes up with something else in the future to put it on screen because I would love to see whatever they come up with next. Just want to get my thoughts to y'all, and y'all have a good one.
Yeah, very poignant observations. I saw you guys nodding a lot.
I have a Dune comp. I can't go into it because we'd go forever. But that's a big theme of Dune is humanity versus base organism, reacting to stimulus response versus learning.
And ego. Yeah.
What's that?
Id versus ego, to put it in Freudian terms. Yeah.
There you go. And I think I made the point earlier, Blackthorn evolves, Yabashige stops. And that's the result.
Yeah, I might the hairs go up on my arms when I hear we're starting to compare humans to animals, and then I'm like, okay, I see where you're going, and I'm done panicking. Michael, you made a good point in the end, and I think really the main point is we are all animals, and there are ways to live where we're just surviving and going on our base instincts, and that seems to be the Yabashige method and the Blackthorn method at the beginning. It's only later that he grows. I called Yabashige a really good foil to Blackthorn in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
On our episode 10 episode, because Blackthorn learns to rise above his instincts and Yabashige never does.
I'm gonna just bite my finger because I know we got to keep rolling on the feedback because this is a rich vein that we could mine.
Cincinnati Joe. Hey, Joe. Were you surprised that there wasn't an indication at the end of the finale about the fate of Toranaga, Blackthorn, and Japan? Either the characters or the real-life equivalents. I thought there might be cards briefly summarizing that Blackthorn never returns to England, Toranaga becomes Shōgun, and the country enters its most peaceful period. David, will you hit my sound? Blackthorn and Buntaro became best friends and took a trip to Hawaii together. Toranaga made a dartboard with Yabashige's face painted on it. Omi was such an amazing ruler of Ajiro that they let him grow his hair out. That's all I
got. Well played. That was awesome. John was like in the background, can you load the sound and stand by? So I was like, that was great, John. That was really fun. Nice. Inspired.
Yeah, I do think that it would have been interesting to get that at the end, but I almost am just like, you can Google it, right? It's all out there.
I'm glad they didn't, because I think that
that's why you have me.
Well, yeah,
you got to justify your own existence.
But Toranaga did straight up. Toranaga said he's never returning to Japan. So, and I think that in Toranaga, we knew who's going to be Shōgun. I think, the fact that it enters its most peaceful period might have been an interesting note at the end. But Toranaga literally told us.
Goes back for me to the elegance of the show. Another show would have done that, and it would have been fine and useful. This show didn't even want to go there, and I think that gives it a mark of a different quality.
Yeah. Well, so Nate? What do you think is like the biggest 3 bullet points that we should know about what happens after this in history?
Okay, so the 3 biggest bullet points, I would say, 1. Toranaga, or the real life Tokugawa Ieyasu, wins the Battle of Sekigahara. And immediately it's very apparent that he does in fact want to and is planning to become Shōgun, because he starts taking steps in that direction. He doesn't receive the official title for a couple years after, but that's going to happen. 2 would be that the heir and Ochiba and some of their supporters hang around for another 15 years, but that the historical Toranaga creates an excuse, we'll say, in 1614 to surround Osaka Castle. There's an incident that he claims is an insult to him. And so that at that point, even the major warlords who had been, even the ones who had been, the warlords who had been against him at Sekigahara and on the losing side were now on his side. So if you imagine, Kiyama or Ono or somebody, they're now on, under Toranaga besieging Osaka Castle, and that ends the Taiko's line. And so now we have no further threat to the Toranaga's supremacy, right? And then the third thing would be the fate of John Blackthorn. You're correct. He doesn't ever leave Japan. Which
and
is
his real name is Adams, right?
Yes, his real name was William Adams. He, we won't go into all the historical detail about him, but it is interesting to note that not only does he stay there, but he ends up becoming the Tokugawa Ieyasu's primary trade negotiator. And so he almost if you were to do, I'm not suggesting they do a follow-on sequel, absolutely against it, just like everybody else. But if you were to, it would be interesting to see scenes where he's the official in charge of trade for Toranaga's shogunate, and the Portuguese have to go through him to negotiate their trade rights, because that's actually what ended up happening. Is the historical William Adams was and he was responsible for negotiating with the Portuguese and the Spanish and everybody else. So it'd be a nice reversal kind of the relationships from when he first got there. So I think those three things would be what I would point out.
Okay. That's fair. I think it would have been nice to have a brief epilogue, but we gave it to you right now. So thank Nate. Matt E writes in twice, and the first time says, "Great show, but a minor knock. I got left with a bad taste when Toranaga says he only kept Blackthorn alive because he made me laugh, and secondarily to be a distraction to his enemies. He seemed to have saved Toranaga's life twice, seemed to genuinely educate him about the hidden Portuguese intentions, and he was at least a useful pawn. And when did he ever make Toranaga laugh? It's appropriate that Blackthorn doesn't rise up as some critical hero of Japan, but that one line seemed to consider Blackthorn as simple comic relief. Second, Anna/Mariko was amazing. I am curious how her arc generally was different from History, the book, or the previous miniseries. Unlike Game of Thrones, which degraded when going away from the source material, my impression is that Shōgun was an improvement even as it strayed from the source. Thanks for the coverage, Matt E. We kind of discussed the Mariko stuff, right? We discussed a lot of the differences. I don't think we talked about the actual history of Hosokawa Gracia. Do you want to go into that a little bit, Nate?
Well, I'll just say that, for one, obviously, I hope it's obvious, she didn't actually have a marital affair with, or extramarital affair with the historical Will Adams. It's likely that they never would have met. So there's that. But in terms of her actual life and death, she died in Osaka in 1600 in the lead up to the conflict that, kind of culminated with the Sekigahara campaign. And her death did serve the same purpose. Now, she didn't dramatically wield an aginata against, Ishido's troops and then threaten suicide and then get attacked by ninjas. She was actually killed by and there's some question, because we don't know exactly what, whether she was killed by her own request or she was killed under orders of her husband. But the idea was that she or her husband did not want her to be dishonored by being held as a captive. And so, she was killed. She did not commit suicide because that would have been against her Catholic beliefs. And so a servant did it for her. But this was, in fact, just like in the story, one of those kind of bombshells that blew apart the Ishido characters, attempt to bring everybody together in a coalition against Toranaga. And it did allow families to leave Osaka. And once the families had left Osaka, that allowed, those clans to choose to side with Toranaga. So I actually think this is one of the great things that the book does is it turns it into a novelized, dramatic, version of it, but that function was there in the actual history, and Lavelle used it. But that's what happens with her. And then she's, known through history as this paragon of Catholic belief
virtue
from the time. Yeah. I
Cool.
think there was even a move to have her
Canonized,
named a saint. I don't know. Yeah, canonized. I don't know if it actually went through, but
We'll write to Pope Francis. Pope Francis, if you're listening, can you let us know if Hosokawa Gracia was ever canonized?
He takes all my calls, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Big fan
John,
of the
real
pod.
quick, I noticed that you put a note on Matt's second part of his question, which had to do with somebody getting bonked on the head. And I'll just quickly respond to Matt on air that this happened like 30 years ago. So my friend is fine. But really interesting about the fact that brain injury and different. Matt talks about different kinds of brain injuries and stuff. So,
all right. Well, thanks, Matt, for both your emails. Shreya M writes in and says, I only just started Shōgun. I'm a binge watcher and have gotten through the first 4 episodes so far. I was listening to your podcast for the first 2 episodes, have not been able to listen to more yet, so obviously ignore this if it's already been addressed. 2 things. 1, while imagining the imagery of Osaka, I was described as underwhelming. The imagery of Osaka was described as underwhelming in the podcast. I think that's from a modern eye.
Mm-hmm.
At this period of time, a view of London or other places in Europe would have looked dirty, as Blackthorne eventually goes on to say, haphazard, etc.
And smaller.
Perhaps it would have been more impressive if they had shown what Europe looked like at the time, because it is not the way it looks now. And 2, I want to emphasize the role reversal in colonialization narratives. I agree with the point about Osaka. I mean, I think Blackthorne really, he says in the book, I think, like, how can I go back to my wife? She's so dirty. Like he's learned to take baths, right? And I think that's just part of like what he learns is, there are good things and bad things about my culture. There's good things and bad things about your culture. And part of the good things about your culture is that you take a freaking bath. As an Indian from India, a person who grew up in the US, even though I knew my history books were referring to indigenous peoples in what we now call the Americas, I always felt some type of way when I read the words like savages, barbaric, uncivilized, etc. used to describe the cultures being colonized. A word that Blackthorne uses regularly and unintentionally, ironically, when he steps foot in Japan to describe people and to describe regions he's just pillaged and plundered, simply because he doesn't understand them. I love the reversal that the show uses to indicate how savage, barbaric, and uncivilized the Dutch and English seemed when they arrived. The foul-mouthedness of the Englishman, the seeming lack of respect for authority, the inability to understand Japanese, the lack of bathing, which I have a whole other paragraph about, the inability to suppress emotion, and so much more. Yeah, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and the savages thing gets a call back in the finale, which is it's good that they bring that up now.
Right. Most imperialism narratives, regardless of the perspective they're meant to be told from, makes those that are colonized seem incompetent, or like a white savior is the only hope. While Shōgun certainly has some leanings in this direction, the positioning of Blackthorne as a savior in some regards, I have to applaud the show for ensuring that the Japanese autonomy and competency are still intact. Blackthorne believes he is a master manipulator in every situation, but Toranaga remains one step ahead. Yeah. That's a good point. I want to pause there for just a second and just say, yeah, I think as you get through the show, because remember, you've this listener Shreya has only watched the first 4 episodes. I think that even becomes less prevalent, the white savior trope, as the series goes on.
He's a clown in the end.
They play with that trope. In fact, I think that's one of the genius aspects of the writing in the show is that, as we have kind of talked about by episode 10, Toranaga is clearly run circles around everybody and including Blackthorne, and Blackthorne himself is different. Yeah.
I also have a separate conversation about bathing because it's a sore topic for me. As an Indian person, I have often heard racist things from even so-called not racist people about the smell of curry and general BO complaints about me, my family, and other Indians. In the US, the property value of a household sold by an Indian person is less than the household sold by a white person due to the smell. My previous landlord attempted to deduct money from my deposit because he thought it smelled like curry. It didn't. Even with regards to other cultures and people of color, many Americans will often use smell and hygiene as an objective reason to discriminate. Objection, of course, being objective being in quotes. I've seen, heard, and been told about this happening to pretty much every person of color I've met.
I have to say they've done studies, and this is absolutely true, that if you put white pictures in a house, it will sell for more money.
Yeah, they should just sell stock photos.
Well, yeah, but
I think they've even done stuff.
Or we could just be less racist. But I'm talking about the short term here, guys. Let's get them some more money for their house.
I think they did stuff where people with names on applications where you're submitting without a picture, that the gender and racial bias happens there too.
Yeah, I mean, it's the bias is everywhere, right? Like, didn't they do a study where there was an orchestra that was auditioning violinists, and they wanted it to be blind because they didn't want to only have male violinists because there had been a bias previously. And the first round, they still picked almost all the men. And when they looked into it, they realized it was the shoes, because women were wearing heels.
They could hear them.
And they could hear the heels. So then they banned shoes on the next one. And that worked. And then it was balanced.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's so innate anyway.
Yep. I love that the show reminds people that showering/bathing frequently is actually a concept from almost every place except Europe. Europeans were dirty, smelly, and unhygienic. But still, the prevailing stereotype is that white people are the clean ones, while people of color are dirty and savages. Yeah, that's a shame. I'm sorry you've had that experience. This show does a lot to challenge prevailing notions of colonialism and its true reason, impact, and purpose. Americans are so often taught that everywhere was lawless, godless, even if it was, why should that matter? But I digress, and uncivilized. But this show hopefully helps people see how rich and complex these pre-existing nations and systems were. Mm-hmm. To tie this back into the image of Osaka, this is a huge moment for Blackthorn, because up until that moment, he underestimated Japan. He assumed it was all the things I just said, and his only experience in Japan so far was a tiny coastal village. I imagine he assumed that village represented the might of Japan, and that was the height of its power. Not to mention, up until now, many European descriptions of other nations and peoples were negative, assuming their incompetence, undervaluing their technology and ways of life, and making conquest seem easy. In comparison to the tiny village he saw and these attitudes towards people around the world outside of Europe, the sprawling, clean, populated, and for the time technologically advanced Vista is above and beyond anything he could have comprehended that the Japanese have. I hope that others learned at least parts of this message, since I think it can help alter the way that Americans view themselves within the broader scope of the world.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest reasons why people react this way is people are afraid of feeling stupid. And when you put them in a situation that's different from the culture or the norms that they grew up in, then they're inevitably going to stumble and not do things properly. And that's one of the things that's one of the reasons why I say I recommend everyone to travel if you can, to make that a financial priority, to read and to watch shows like this, to learn as much about the rest of the world as you can, just to see that it also helps you, that feeling of being stupid in other cultures also helps you treat people as less stupid who are coming, when people come to the US and maybe they are struggling a little bit with their English, but imagine they speak at least one other language that you don't speak. It's all a matter of perspective.
If not more languages.
Yeah, exactly. And so we have to be more forgiving with each other and with ourselves. And I think if we're more forgiving with ourselves, then we are less judgmental of other people too.
Yeah, I try to go to each new culture with a sense of, I want to learn more about you, except the British. I really just let me tell you a story. Let me just tell you a story about when I visited England on my honeymoon. I'm in London, and I'm in, what's that park where all the spies have their meetings? I'm in that park.
Okay.
And I'm walking, and there's this older woman walking with a man, arm in arm, and she drops a £5 bill out her pocket. And I pick it up and I try to hand it to her. I'm like, excuse me, ma'am, you dropped this. She ignores me. And so that only made me judge the British more. And I bought my wife ice cream with that £5 bill later.
But that's one person, because then I've also been...
it's all of England.
No, you were wrong. Because I've also been, I've been in lots of places where I have suitcases that are too big for myself because I'm an overpacker, and it's one of my toxic traits. And I can see who helps me carry it up stairs in the metro and things like that. And Londoners, they'll often, they take it, walk along beside me and deposit it next to me without saying anything. Same thing happens in New York, which people point out.
Yep.
Which people point out there's a difference between being nice and being kind. So maybe New Yorkers aren't nice, but they're kind in ways like that.
Being a West Coast to East Coast transplant, I've discovered that very much. And on the West Coast, everybody is nice, but over here on the East Coast, everyone's more kind in general.
I would say the same comparison with the South and versus like New York City. It's kind of a similar thing.
See, here we go. We're talking about a fictional Shōgun show, and we're deconstructing a cultural
and we're just
norm.
making sure that we're continuing to be ethnocentrist here, right?
That's right.
We're just reinforcing it.
We're talking about our own experiences. We should let Nate talk more about the niceness and kindness of Japan.
Well, so I mean, there's a couple of things that I want to directly respond to in this excellent feedback, and I sincerely hope that Shreya continues watching the show and would love to hear more of her observations. Hopefully she can pop onto the Discord or something and share as she does, because I think she points out, and I suppose I'm assuming that she's female and I shouldn't. But anyway, what I would say directly to the idea of traveling that you brought up, Elysia, is for me, I mean, I went into my experience, my first time outside the US was going to Japan as an exchange student. And it was something that, obviously I'd prepared for. I had spent a year studying the language. I had spent most of my life, since the age of 4 or 5, wanting to go to Japan and experience the culture. I may have been a weeb before the word weeb was even invented. If I'm perfectly honest, but, I still got there and was not prepared for what was different, because you can't imagine all the things, like the things that you think you're going to experience are not the things that you experience in daily life. And I think that's part of the value of traveling, is that you get into, it's not about, oh, can I eat this food? Is it or whatever. It's can I navigate the metro or the subway system? Do I know where what the protocols are for finding a restroom, and stuff like that. Right. And there were so many experiences that I had as a student in Japan where my assumptions of what the best was, which of course was, everything American's the best, because when you grow up in America, that's what you're told. So many of those assumptions were challenged. And often I would see what the Japanese system was for a certain thing. And it was like, wait a minute, the way they do it is better. And that's not the case in all things. And I don't want to sound like I think Japan is perfect or anything. They have their problems, like everywhere. But I think that's the value in travel and in experiencing different cultures, is that you see that your world that you grew up in is not only not the only one, but it's not necessarily the best. There are good things in other places too. And I've been in, many countries since then and can say the same about all of those places. But to go, if I can just go back to the points that Shreya makes here.
Can I interject really quick, Nate?
Sorry. Yeah, absolutely.
I heard this story from a friend who had been traveling in Japan a number of years ago on the subway, and there was a person, I can't remember, the person had some extra needs. I can't remember if they were elderly or if it was a physical disability, but the conductor on the platform where they were boarding the station called ahead to the conductor 5 or 6 stations down where they were getting off, so that when that person got off, there was somebody there to assist them off.
Yeah.
Yes,
that's incredible to me.
Well, there's institutional helpfulness in Japanese culture for sure.
Mind blowing.
Yeah,
from compared to the New York City
right.
subway.
So that sort of thing is
they help you onto the track in the New York City subway.
Yeah, what? Sorry,
they help you onto the track in the New York City subway.
The train.
They'll push you in.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of thing is true, and that's wonderful. There's also things like, it's so minor that I almost hesitate to bring it up. but there's for foreigners who, spend extended time in Japan, there's a long time complaint of, the fact that every time you eat with a new Japanese person, they have to compliment the fact that you can use chopsticks. It's, almost a trope, right? Is like, oh, you're so good with wahashi jozu desu ne. Abby will know exactly what I'm talking about when she hears this. But
special shout out to Abby too, and Davey Mack who both live in Japan, who are both non-Japanese living in Japan.
So you get this, and by the time you've been there a while, you get this so much, and it's like, well, of course I can use chopsticks. What do you? I use chopsticks at the Chinese restaurant back home. What do we like? Why is this?
It's like you tie your shoes so well, so impressive.
Well, with my close friends, I would reply back things like, "You use a fork so well."
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing, right? But it's this little minor thing, but it becomes an annoyance, and it comes from the this perception of particularly Westerners of not being familiar with Japanese culture or Asian culture, being able to use chopsticks and whatever. And I mean, there's a warranted factor that my mother, bless her, still can't use chopsticks. She's in her 60s. And so for an older generation, it's probably more true than it is for.
My parents taught me how to use chopsticks as a kid, but they love Chinese food. So
when I started dating my wife, she was very good at using chopsticks, and I felt judged, so I just taught myself to use chopsticks, and now I still can.
But what it did, at least for me, it was annoying, but it made me realize, okay. So I'm walking into this culture where they have a perception of me based off of my, ethnicity, nationality, background, and whatever. And it's really innocuous. But if it's annoying me this much, how much worse is it for, some of these horrible things that Shreya is describing here, right? And it's like, that was my first, okay, I get this as a concept. Mm-hmm. Because if I'm feeling this emotional about, somebody complimenting me on my chopsticks, but feeling that it's like condescending, right? Then how much worse is it when it's overt, like not being, like being charged extra in your apartment and something like that.
Yeah, that's disgusting, by the way, that happened to you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, I don't want to dwell too much longer on it, but she makes Shreya makes some absolutely wonderful points that are important, and that as an educator, one of the things that I try to do in my class is humanize the culture of Japan or Asia, whichever whatever course I'm teaching, and have them see the historical figures and the culture in general as three-dimensional instead of just two-dimensional media images, so that they can then come through. So, we talk about the fact that samurai aren't this kind of, and this was one of the great things about the show, is that it showed, you've got Yabushige, who's obviously a high-ranking samurai, enough that he owns a whole province, but he's shifty and he's not loyal, and he's, not this stereotype that we see in maybe in anime or manga or whatever of the samurai. So I think those are great points that Shreya brings up.
Absolutely.
Well, guys, I got to head out because I've got to head on to my next thing. But I know that David and Elysia are going to be happy to finish out the feedback with you, Nate.
So yeah, we'll finish that up and then we'll do our outro. I know we've, in good true Lorehounds fashion, we tried to schedule this for a window of time, and we've completely blown that window of time.
Yep.
As we will want to do. John, thank you so much for all your help and partnership with this. It's just been such a pleasure to be with you and Elysia for this podcast. And so,
thank you. And thank you, Nate, for being here and sharing your expertise with us. We have a lot of armchair experts around the Lorehounds, but it's rare that we have a real expert.
Well, thank you for having me, and it was a pleasure talking with you, John, and I hope to keep interacting on the Discord.
Of course,
and not that I don't study Westeros, but I will be there as a fan. So
yes,
all
absolutely.
Right. Looking forward to it.
All right, John, thanks. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
All right, so our last up email is Kyle M. And Kyle says, Blackthorn's relationship to death and to self has really evolved over the course of his arc. When he comes to Toranaga to beg him to stop killing villagers in his effort to find the arsonist who set fire to the Erasmus, he knew damn well who they were. This is all a manipulation. He attempts a brand new strategy to threaten to stab himself in his own belly, clearly drawing inspiration from his love of Mariko. He declares that he will die in protest of Toranaga's actions in the village. He admits here that he has been the enemy among them all along, using the Japanese word for it, a callback to the first two installments of the series, pursuing his own selfish aims and intending to exploit them. I think we talked about this earlier, the arc that Blackthorn was ultimately on, and that he finally, and this scene in the book comes up way earlier. And on the official podcast, was it the official? Again, I can't forget. There was a conversation with the showrunners, and they talked about holding the scene because it just would have felt very weird earlier.
That was on the official podcast, but then that was kind of a spoiler on the official podcast, because then I knew, well, at some point in the series, he's going to attempt.
It's going to show up, yeah. And it just naturally fell perfectly into that moment, and I thought that it was just an amazing placement and a beautiful when art is unfolding in this way, and then suddenly something naturally falls into place where you're like, I don't know how to deal with this. It really is a mark of that creativity is happening. Real creativity is happening here.
If I may, just real quickly, in the book, not only does it show up earlier, but it's a much different context. Toranaga's not involved, and it's a condition for. Well, I guess I don't want to ruin the book for people, but it's a condition for something that is ongoing rather than having anything to do with the destruction of the ship or whatever. And I was very glad when they didn't do it. So I was like, okay, we don't have to worry about that Blackthorn seppuku thing. And then it shows up here, but I didn't have a problem with it because it's at the end of Blackthorn's arc.
Yep.
He's showing us how he's changed. It's not just stuck in the middle. So agree everything with everything you two said. I just wanted to point out that it was so weird in the book, in the 1980 shorts, how it shows up. And the skill of the writers here was excellent in, okay, let's bring it back in, but in a place where it does have that natural feel, and it does tell us something about him.
All right, carrying on. Now he wants to use his death to protest the further harm of the good. Yeah, sorry, I'm carrying on here. Now that he wants to use his death to protest further harm to the good people of the village, he's seen that death can be meaningful, and he embraces that his life is no more important than those of his fellow community members. Toranaga stops him. This is all just a test of his commitment. And by the end of the episode, Blackthorn and Fujisama seem to emerge aligned in their view of death as well, at least as it relates to grief and loss. Something we haven't talked at all about this podcast is Fujisama, our dear and beloved Fujisama, unexpected fan favorite. She was so lovely, in that scene of them on the boat, on the water together was so moving. We all are going to experience loss and grief in our life. And the way that they showed us how a situation like that can unfold, and how you can, sorry, getting a little moved here, reach across to somebody else. We oftentimes feel alone and isolated in our emotions. And in this moment, they could be together. And that was just gorgeous.
Yeah. No, I said before, kind of half jokingly, but half not, that the only person I'd be upset about dying would be her. So I'm very happy with how she wound up. But I do have the idea that she had a different ending in the book.
Do we want to say anything relative to?
Okay, maybe not. Yeah. But maybe I feel like she got a better ending.
I'm going to be honest, because she's not as much of a character in the book, that I honestly don't remember.
Right.
I think I know what happens, and I think let's just say she gets her wish initially, I think. But I could very well be wrong.
Right. That's the idea that I had. Yeah. But I'm so glad that they just ended everyone in the perfect place. And I'm so glad that she gets some peace. She's not forced into any sort of relationship. She can just spend her days, in quiet contemplation and living.
Okay, wrapping up this email, they have a moving conversation, which she seems entirely at peace, having found a new purpose. As a nun, Fujisama, best nun, Blackthorn says in his broken Japanese, his last act of kindness towards her before she goes is to take her out for the boat ride, release the remains of the loved ones together. They pour their ashes out. And then we have the rosary, which is lovely. There's a beautiful callback to the moment before her son died as well. Fuji comforts her friend as he hesitates to drop the symbol of his love into the sea, saying, "Let your hands be the last to hold her," echoing Mariko's words to her in her life's worst moment. And I think this is where the show, we talked about a lot of this in True Detective, where the show is rhyming.
Right.
It's taking couplets, visual and dialogue and character moments, and then rhyming them later on. And I think, Nate, you mentioned that too, where we have some physical placement that's similar from episode to episode. So again, going to the craftsmanship and feeling those, where they're not just cheap, oh, turnabout, hey, the character ended up the same place. These are actually really beautiful moments that sort of create the circle of life vibe of things. So. Right. Well, I think, go ahead. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So, I just wanted to say that on the physical location rhyming, I won't go into all of it because there's so much, but there's certain places where, like the beach in Ajiro is, when you look at, it's where Buntaro was about to cut off Blackthorn's head. And then in the final episode, the final scene even, it's where he's helping pull Blackthorn's ship up onto the beach. And so there's a lot of those that are so good.
Right.
Yeah.
And in terms of rhyming too, we mentioned it briefly in the previous episode, but apparently where they poured out the ashes is where James Clavell's, the writer of the book's ashes, were actually poured out, the same bay.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's wild. So, well, I think we should wrap it up here. I know we could go on for a good hour or more easily. Nate, thank you again for willing to jump on. Thank you so much for all of your...
thank you very much for having me.
Great insights, and so glad that you were able to find us, and a big warm welcome. Elysia, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for everything this season.
Yes, I'm very glad to be here. And I think around the same time that this is coming out, there's a project that I have long been teasing, or at least for a few weeks been teasing publicly. The Star Wars Complete Canon Timeline podcast will release its first episode just in time for May the 4th. So hope you guys can check it out.
Super. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. I'll do a separate outro, and everyone can go up about your days. And thanks, everyone. We'll see you on the next one. Well, that was a really great conversation. Thanks, everyone, for sticking around. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Elysia. Thank you, John. Special thanks to Abby and Davey Mack as well for all of your great input over the season. Just a few quick notes before we wrap it up for today. Remember, if you're interested in supporting the community and you want to help us out doing all the different projects and podcasts that we've got going on, check us out on Supercast or Patreon. Supercast is our new preferred platform. It gives us a lot more tools. It's less cost to us as well. And we make sure that everybody that we participate and work with gets to share in the benefits of what we're doing here. I want to just really quick, while I'm at it, to talk about Supercast. As you may know, we're going to be covering House of the Dragon full time. And we've come up with a new way to offer ad-free versions or that are also early access, as well as the show guide, which is going to be subscriber only. We're calling this a seasons pass, and we can do this on Supercast. We can create a dedicated feed that offers all this stuff, and that is charged only once. So you don't actually have to subscribe on a recurring basis and then remember to cancel that. You can buy for $10 a pass to the entire season of House of the Dragon. We're doing season 1 recap right now. We're starting that now. And then once season 2 starts, we'll be doing weekly scene by scene, episode by episode coverage. And if that's something that interests you, then definitely check that out. We just released our first season 1 recap episode. There's a link in the show notes of that. If you're interested, you can go there. $10, you get forever coverage, right? It's just a one-time deal, and you get the early access and ad-free. I also want to talk about the show guide. John, along with Aaron and Brian8063, have been pouring themselves into creating this amazing show guide. We're using the Notion platform. If you were around for True Detective or Shōgun, we had show guides for both of those titles. They have gone to town on this. There's a bestiary for the dragons. There's location information about all the different places, as well as character guides. So if you go on to, say, Rhaenyra, you can look at her sheet, and it's got all of our children. And if you click on those, you'll go to the bio page about them as well. You can link out to the actors. It's a really amazing resource. It's also really great if you're second screening the show. You can have this up on your phone, and you can quickly find characters or places that you're like, hey, wait, who is that? Where am I seeing this? Or how does this relate to anything else? And another cool feature is that it's season 1 only. So you can get all of the basic information you need without worrying about getting spoiled, because the internet is just full of information, since a lot of this is coming from histories that have already been written. So if that show guide and hey, I just want to throw some support, I don't want to do the whole subscription thing, consider the season pass, because we think it's a really good option. All right, so enough of all of that. Quick shout out to all of our affiliates. We've got Radioactive Ramblings. That's Chase and Aaron. They just finished up on Fallout. They are now going to be covering, I believe, Invincible, and then they're going to move on to The Boys this June. So that's going to be really great. Make sure to check them out. Rings and Rituals just dropped a new episode. Marilyn Arpakila and Dr. Sarah Brown are examining the rich world of ritual and history, using season 1 of Rings of Power as a lens to examine wider questions about ritual. It's a fascinating conversation. Really good stuff. Check that out as well. We'll Shift Dust. Elysia has got Beacon 23 season 2 running right now. And Steve and Anthony over on Properly Howard Movie Reviews are in the middle of their Felonies and Fugazi seasons. They just dropped Tango and Cash, and next up is Pulp Fiction. For us, we've got some Doctor Who coming up. We've got some X-Men 97 coming up. We've got some more Silmarillion stories coming out as well. And then we're staring down the barrel of June, where we've got The Acolyte, House of the Dragon, and then The Bear at the end of the summer. So a lot of content headed our way. It's a busy season this year. Quick shout out to our Discord server boosters, Opus the Machine, Gnarls, Aaron K, Tiller the Thriller, Dork of the Ninjas, and Doof71. Thank you all so very much for supporting our community, making sure that our server has extra bells and whistles. And again, visit us on our Discord. We've got a great welcoming community, lots of great conversations happening there. It's a fun group. It's where we can sort of have that virtual water cooler to talk about the shows and books and movies that we love. To our Lore Master subscribers, these are our top tier subscribers. They really make sure that we've got the resources we need as a podcast and as a community to keep on going. So we like to give them a shout out every episode. Samartian, Mark H., Michael G., Michelle E., David W., Brian P., Nick W., SC, Peter O.H., Bettina W., Adam S., Nancy M., Duve71, Brian 8063, Frederick H., Sarah L., Gareth C., Eric F., Matthew M., Sarah M., DJ Miwa, Andra B., Kwong Yu, Deadeye Jedi Bob, Nathan T., Alex V., Aaron T., Sub-Zero, Aaron K., Dally V21, Mothership 61, Gnarls, and forever last but never least, Adrian. Thank you all so very much for your ongoing and continued support. We couldn't do it without you. If you're not a subscriber, but you're just listening on the public feeds, thanks for listening. It means a lot. We really pay attention to how we're doing, and it's just great that we have such a fun and welcoming community. So I think that about wraps it up for us for Shōgun coverage. It's been great. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you on the next podcast.
The Lorehounds podcast is produced and published by the Lorehounds. You can send questions and feedback and voicemails at thelorehounds.com/contact. Get early and ad-free access to all Lorehounds podcasts at patreon.com/thelorehounds. Any opinions stated are ours personally and do not reflect the opinion of or belong to any employers or other entities. Thanks for listening.